Hey guys, my name is Ryan Fee, and what I want to do is talk to you guys about what the most common leaks people have in poker are. So the first thing, I think the way to sort of best answer this question is that, I think when everybody, for the most part, first starts out, they play too loose because they don't understand sort of like the differing value between different hands, and playing poker is more fun than not playing poker. So like, they just sort of naturally play hands just to like sort of see what happens, right? So they just play really loose, and you'll see this in your cash $5 home game or maybe some play money tables. Eventually, if a lot of players that play this way, they sort of time goes on, and they find out that if you just play a tight strategy versus these loose strategies, you just have the best hand, way more often than your opponent will, and you just win a lot of money that way. Just having them essentially put money in with the worst hand into the best hand, and the hand will go to showdown. So sort of, I think sort of naturally, like many people end up being like a little bit too loose, and then they end up being probably too tight, and then I would say, sort of like the next progression is to then be loose again. And the thing about, once you go from loose to tight to loose is that you're typically, if you're, now that you sort of revisited the loose strategy, you're typically going to be a little bit more calculated about it. But I would say, certainly through my career, and like I think like a lot of people, is that they sort of oscillate. They go from like, okay, originally I'm too loose, and like now I'm too tight, and then I'm gonna go, okay, I'm gonna play like a little bit looser. I know there's some hands that like I'm missing value on, and then they play that loose. But again, they're sort of, by playing loose, you're in more marginal situations. The decisions are more difficult. So naturally, and you're probably going to be embracing more variance, playing more aggressive. Naturally, you're going to go on a big downswing at some point. When that point happens, oftentimes you can, sort of get shell shocked. It can cloud your judgment, and then you can go back to playing too tight, even though that's a, potentially worse strategy. It's sometimes hard to see what the best strategy is. Vice versa, you could be playing overly loose, and be running really good, win a lot of money, and then think that's the best way to play, and then play like that, and then to, only go on an even bigger downswing because you don't realize that you're actually making minus EV decisions. So when it comes to mistakes in poker, it really, the game is so complex and sort of diverse and rich, that like many plays in a vacuum could potentially be profitable, but it really comes down to, sort of like, there's some definitely that aren't profitable, so like a good technical foundation is important. But even if you have a technical foundation, you could still be making big mistakes relative to the players you're playing against. There's some players you want to bluff a lot pre-flop. There's some players you want to bluff a lot pre-flop and never bluff on the flop. And there's some players that you can't bluff pre-flop, flop, or to the turn, but they fold the river every time, and you just want to raise and just bet 3 times. There's some players that never fold the river. There's some players that only check raise good hands. There's some players that never fold a flop c-bet. There's so many things, especially in a ring poker set, let alone heads up, or sorry, I should say heads up, let alone ring poker. It's just so diverse that, in terms of like what mistakes, like what's a common mistake, here's a common mistake. A common mistake would be playing a hand pre-flop or betting the flop with a hand without a clear and defined turn and a river play. When I bet the turn with, let's say, 7-6 on Jack 8-4, I have a gut shot, and I know that I'm oftentimes betting the turn and oftentimes betting the river. Likewise, if I bet a hand like, let's say I bet a hand on this board like 9-5, okay? If I bet a hand like 9-5 on Jack 8-4, I'll only bet if the turn is a Queen 10, 7, or 6, where I pick up equity, where I pick up a straight draw. So I have a clearly defined, sort of plan with this hand on the flop. So likewise, if, let's say I bet a hand like Queen Jack on this flop. Unless the turn is an 8 or maybe a 4, I'm almost certainly going to be betting the turn with this hand. So I have a plan. I'm going to bet the flop depending on betting all the remaining streets with Queen Jack, or I'm going to bet the flop with 9-5. Well, I'm betting only when I pick up equity. Or betting 6-7. I'm betting no matter what the turn, almost no matter what the turn is. So having clearly defined plans for the hand, and like also, or like another mistake is like, you could have a really good hand and you could bet, but here's, maybe the problem is that like you might only get called by a better hand. So it's not such that you're afraid of not having the best hand in the situation. It's about, it's about betting and then getting called by a better hand. That's like, I would say that's a, big mistake that even like, some very good players make, where it's like, yeah, you have the best hand, but there's no point in betting or raising on the, especially on the river, because you're only going to get called by a better hand. So, I guess those are some common mistakes, sort of like things to think about. I would say, like, honestly, like, almost the premise of the question is a mistake in and of itself. It's like, what are the most common mistakes that, like, poker players make? I mean, there's, like a variety of mistakes. The game is so rich in depth. I would say like another sort of common mistake would be like HUDs, like getting absorbed. Those you play, you import hands, and you can have a heads-up display on your table, and you can see different stats. I would say almost of all the questions that I get about HUD stat stuff, I would say 70% of the questions are a misuse of the HUD itself. So I would say, yeah, misusing HUDs and not, I guess, just not understanding the game from a technical fundamental level and sort of going over it with a fine-tooth comb are, yeah, like some of the biggest mistakes. I'm sorry, getting back to like I think the question is almost a mistake in and of itself, in that, it's, I guess I'll be giving some decent examples, but they're really sort of more broad conceptual things than specific things. So I guess if you're if you're asking this in a specific way, I would say that the game is too complex, for, like, I could say, like, people don't bet enough on the turn when the flush comes in, right? Like, but that's like a really general statement that, that's ambiguous as to whether or not that's true. The conceptual stuff's like, sort of ranking. Like, a lot of players don't rank their hands. A lot of players don't think about, sort of like their opponent's range in relation to their hand or their range. A lot of people don't think about, again, the game tree like we were talking about earlier. I think there's a lot of structural, conceptual things that people don't apply, because it's so easy to be like, oh, I'm just going to play tight, or like, oh, I just always fold, pocket pairs to 3-bet. It's hard to look at pot odds and figure out, what boards are good for you, what boards aren't good for you, and then, like how your range works versus your opponent's range. So I would say, honestly, the most common mistake is taking a very simplistic view versus a simplistic, confident view, playing a complex game, where in reality what you should be doing is taking, a very sort of comprehensive view that's very skeptical of all of your knowledge and your strategies, and are flexible to learn and change. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.